Welcome to the Expanding Worlds podcast. I'm your host, Graham Caldow. And welcome to this final episode in the Financial Future series. Finance is an important part of helping our young people to plan how they'll manage their lives when we're no longer around. In some ways, it's the foundation for all the things they will do, what they will do with their time, where they'll live, and the level and type of support that they will have. My guest this week knows a bit about that and has, for obvious reasons, been an important part of the podcast. It's my husband and podcast producer, Graham Caldow. As you've probably heard if you listen to the podcast regularly, he's also written a book called What's Possible? Planning a Better Future for Your Young Adult with Additional Needs. And in his book, one of the sections focuses on finance, because that's always been something that we've known was important for the future of our daughter. Of course, I need to be clear, neither of us are financial advisors, and we're not giving financial advice. If I were to give any advice, it would be to find the right professional to help you in this area. If I've learned anything from this series, it's that getting the right advice is key, because so often the rules vary, not only from country to country, but state to state, and maybe even from street to street. So finding the right professional who knows this is key. But some fundamentals apply regardless, and these are not about how you do these things, but about the why and for whom you're doing them, with or for. So our discussion today will be about why planning in this area is so important and what some of the key issues are to think about. So without further ado, I'll let Graham introduce himself. So welcome, Graham. Thank you for taking the time to walk from one room of the house to another to do the podcast with me. Can we start by talking a little bit about you?
Thank you, Deborah. I'm delighted to be joining you from the other room. For the last 20 years or so, I've been self-employed, running my own businesses. So I've been lucky enough to be around both my daughters as they were growing up. And of course, I've been a part of this journey with you and our family. Recently, I wrote a book to share some of our ideas about how we planned our daughter's life before she was really able to talk about what she wanted in the future. In fact, now, for the last few years, she participates and often leads the conversation. She's much older, and it feels to me like the plan is coming together. She has a part-time job, has started to build some friendship networks, and has become more skilled at looking after herself around the house. How we've helped her develop these life skills is something I discuss in my book. But also, a big part of the book is about finances, because how we organise and manage our money often dictates how we live our life. If her finances are well organised, then there's a much better likelihood she will be able to live the life she wants when we're no longer around. So what we've done over the years is try to give our daughter as much financial independence as possible, gradually, just as we have with other aspects of her life.
Can you explain a bit more about what you mean by giving financial independence gradually?
When our children are born, we control all of their finances and pay for everything they need. Food, bills, clothes, vacations, everything. But there will come a point when their finances will become separate from ours. We wanted to plan this for our daughter so the transition would be smooth, and it was done before we weren't in a position where we couldn't be involved. In my book, I talk about a circle of control where, when our children are young, our circle is large and theirs is very small. Over the years, that circle will change and theirs gets bigger and bigger, and ours gets smaller to the point where maybe it's just a narrow circle around the outside, reflecting those things we still might have protected through something like a trust. We started with a weekly allowance, so we started very small, but over time this financial separation has become more and more. She's now responsible for quite a few areas of her expenses, so in effect what we've done is extend the circle of control she has over her own life. Over time we want to extend this circle so she controls more and more. After all, we can't very well paint a picture of how she might live her life in the future if she doesn't have control over her own money. It's fair to say we're quite ambitious about what we want for her and what we think she can do. And we talk about this with her. But each of our children is different, and each of our circumstances are different too. What's right for us may not be right for others. Other people might decide the circle of control for their children is smaller or larger, depending on their child's ability to manage their life and finances. But I feel with our daughter, I want her to control as much of her financial life as possible.
You say give them as much control as possible, but also still have some parts which are out of their immediate control. How does that actually work?
We decided to use a trust, even though I feel pretty confident she will be able to manage her day-to-day money for things like shopping and general expenses. We do want to leave some safeguards in place. We set up a trust so any assets we leave, like a house to live in, won't be in her control but under the control of a trust. The logic behind this is so she will always have a place to live with the heating and lights on. While I can't advise other people about trusts, I would say the benefits of a trust are roughly the same from Sydney to Seattle, from London to LA, because the principles are the same, even if details or specific peculiarities differ from place to place. But if you do set up a trust, you will need to think about who future trustees will be after you. You could use professional people, like lawyers and accountants, but this will come at a cost. If you do choose someone you know, there are certain things you should ask yourself. Is this person young enough to be around your child well into the future? Are they good with their own financial management? After all, they will be guiding your child and their money habits. Are they willing and capable of handling the responsibility? Are they a good administrator? Being good with money is not always the same as doing the necessary paperwork each year, and there will be paperwork. There is also an issue here of your child's vision for their life. You know your child best, but whoever comes after you won't have the same knowledge as you do about your child. So you need to know they will follow the plans you've created with your child. Sometimes I think this comes down to expectations too. I've always expected more of my daughter than most people, and I want those high expectations to continue all her life. I want a trustee who will always be asking what's possible, not what's easy.
Let's go back a bit to that circle of control and teaching our children to take more control. How do you build those financial skills?
We did this with our daughter in 3 ways. Quite a few years ago, we started by giving her an allowance to spend, and that's gradually become many different accounts for different types of expenses. First, we started with one account for personal spending, which was for things like going out to cafes or other entertainment expenses. After that, we set her up with an account for haircuts and clothes. The reason she had this account, this separate pot of money, was so when she went to the hairdresser or to buy clothes, she wasn't asking us for money. She had her own money to pay for it. This was to help her understand there are things we spend on, but not necessarily each week. These expenses come round every so often, and we need to have money set aside for them. Over time, this has been extended, so now she has a savings account, because if we go away, say on vacation, she needs to pay for herself out of these savings. For us, this separation is a way of showing her what life costs, rather than us simply paying and her not being aware that it does cost. Another way we've built her money skills is to get her to track her spending each week. She does this on Sundays, and she uses a simple spreadsheet to put her spending totals, things like cafes and clothes, so she can see how much she has spent each week. And at the end of each month, she can see how much she has spent on each category. I'm sure lots of people listening might think that this is a bit extreme, but I totally believe this is one of the most important money habits she can have. By looking at how much she has spent in a cafe, she can think about whether it was a good use of her money. We have a conversation about this at the end of each month, just to reinforce the idea of thinking about where she does spend her money. We use a spreadsheet because it works with our daughter, but there are other ways to track spending. Bank apps usually tell us how much we've spent, and it even puts them into categories too. Often, our chats with our daughter at the end of the month will be about needs and wants. We realise the importance of ensuring she starts to practice delayed gratification. That is, she starts to ask herself whether she really needs something or just wants it and buys it. I'm as guilty as anyone else when it comes to buying what I want rather than what I need. And yes, many a time I've woken up the next morning and thought, why did I buy that? But delayed gratification is sometimes misunderstood. It's not about not buying, it's about giving ourselves time to make a considered decision. We have a 24-hour rule whereby we wait a day to think about it, before we buy. And with my daughter, I frame it along the lines of a question. Do you need it, or do you just want it? Often she answers she just wants it, and the discussion is done. Other times she says she wants it and is determined to buy it, and she does. But it is her money. The point is to get her to ask the question rather than use it as a ploy to stop her spending her money. We all make mistakes with money, and that's why I want to hand over as much control of her finances to her now so she can make her mistakes while I'm here to support and guide her, and also to make sure the financial implications are kept small. I want my financial legacy to her to be these solid financial habits.
What else would you say is part of the financial legacy that we leave our children?
This may sound strange, but I wouldn't say leaving money is the most important part of our financial legacy. Even if you don't consider yourself well off, your financial legacy is huge if your child has good habits around spending, like thinking before they spend, tracking what they spend, not spending money they don't have, things like that. I think if they have a good attitude towards money, built on what you show them, then this is a great legacy. No matter how much you leave, if they don't have good money habits, the money won't last long. A financial legacy is only one part of the legacy we leave our children, but it is a very important one.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found this Financial Future series useful, and it gave you some ideas that you can explore further. Finance is one area where in some ways it is about what we do as much as what our children do. The podcast will now be taking a little bit of a hiatus, in part because I'm going home for a while to Australia, but also because I think I need to think more about how I'd like to move forward. Over the past 7 years, the podcast has gone from me interviewing other parents and asking them to share their stories, to sharing some of the bigger picture solutions that are happening out there. The podcast started because we needed answers, and we've found them. And I won't lie, the podcast has played an incredibly important role in helping us support our daughter to build the future she has now. And in some ways, I guess I feel like I can step back now from her journey. But I don't want to step back from the podcast completely, because I think there's an awful lot more to share, a lot more stories out there to share, and a lot more solutions out there that could be helping others. But I do want to find a different way to present those to you. So I'll be taking a bit of a break to think about how I can best serve you as an audience. Of course, I'd love your ideas too about what you think the podcast could look like in the future. You can email me, deborah@expandingworlds.com, or you can message me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm on all those channels, so please come, and I really would appreciate any thoughts that you have. So thank you and goodbye for now.